Hello, hello. Welcome back to the She Wrote This Part podcast. I'm Adriana, your host. I am a certified clinical hypnotherapist, and I gotta tell you, I made a really bad decision today. I had spicy hot chicken wings directly before I hit record, so my mouth is burning. So we're gonna see how this goes. Welcome back. I'm so excited to have a little chit chat today about something that showed up in sessions this week. And I don't mean just like it showed up. I mean like it showed up in a handful of sessions, which is really my sign of, I need to say this out loud, because if it's happening in sessions, and it's probably happening everywhere. So here's what I was noticing is that these clients came into the session feeling stuck, and they were kind of spinning a little bit, the way that you get when you've been working on something for so long and you can't figure out why it's happening. And the thing that they were stuck on was anxiety itself, like specifically just the anxiety. And the way that they were describing it was really general, like my anxiety keeps coming back and I don't know why, or I feel like I've done so much work on my nervous system and it's still not right. And I was listening to, these clients share separately, right? There were separate clients and separate sessions on different weeks, now that I think about it, because I think that this was appearing the last handful of weeks, actually. So it must be something in the stars. I always think it's so interesting how there's patterns in, the things that are coming up for my clients. I just think it's so interesting. Anyway, I was noticing the same thing that was happening, is that they were describing the anxiety like it was one big thing, this looming ambient general thing that was just sort of present, and they were trying to solve for that. They were trying to solve for like the whole thing all at once. And we'll start with one particular client. He kept sharing, I'm keeping details vague, obviously, but he kept coming back to this general feeling of anxiety that he couldn't trace. Like, I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know if it's an old pattern. I don't know what it is. And we're talking through it. And somewhere in the conversation, it comes out that he had a couple of really charged interactions with his ex-wife recently. And the more we zoomed in on those specific interactions, the tone that she used, the things that were said, the way it left him feeling, the more obvious it became that like that was it. That is where the anxiety was coming from, not some vague, mysterious, unnamed source. From those specific moments, that specific person triggered a very specific set of old programming around how he was feeling about himself when he was spoken to in that way. And when we zoomed in on those specific moments, we had so much more to work with, because now we're not trying to solve for like anxiety in general. We're working at something specific, something with the shape, something that we can actually decode. And something similar happened with the second client that I'll share about, which was also the same week. She kept saying things like, I don't understand why my nervous system is still dysregulated. I've done so much work. And I want to be really clear that she has done so much work. Her baseline is genuinely different than when we started working together, but she had this very specific experience where she was talking to some new people and she was thinking about dating, and those new people ghosted her. And that ghosting sent her into a spiral. And instead of zooming in on that moment and what it touched within her, she was zooming all the way out and questioning her entire nervous system, her entire healing journey, everything. And the moment we zoomed in on the ghosting, on what that meant to her, the not being chosen, the wound that specific experience activated, it was like, oh, this is different. This doesn't have anything to do with my nervous system being broken. This is just a specific wound that got activated by a very specific situation. And that wound has a name and it has a root. And that gave us something that we could actually work with. And what I want you to take away from these two stories is something that I think a lot of people are doing and not realizing. Anxiety is not one thing. And I think that is actually the answer to why anxiety keeps coming back no matter how much work you do on it, because you're solving for the sensation of anxiety. you're pointed out the output, right? The tightness, the dread, the low hum of something. And you're trying to make that go away. But the individual sources that are generating that sensation, they haven't been touched. So the sensation comes back. And it's not because you didn't work hard enough. It's not because you didn't have the right, meditation, or you didn't have the right sequence of breath work. It's because you were working on the feeling instead of the things underneath it. So it's kind of like taking painkillers for a broken bone, right? The painkillers make the pain go away, but the bone is still broken, so the pain will keep coming back. It doesn't matter how many painkillers you take, the bone is still broken. And I know that sounds really simple, but I genuinely think most people are relating to their anxiety like it is one thing. Like there's this just big general sensation, the tightness, the dread, the hum, and the goal is for that to go away, right? That's what the goal is for people. I just want to make my anxiety go away. And that is a good goal because I know that stuff doesn't feel great. But then all of the work gets pointed at that goal, right? The goal is to make the sensations go away. So then you work on, your regulation tools, which is your meditation or your breathing, or you journal, right? Or you go to therapy about that sensation, all of it aimed at the sensation of anxiety, at the output, the tightness, the things that you feel, right? And the sensation can get quieter. It can. You've experienced that before, right? You can regulate yourself into a calmer state, and that is real, and it matters. It matters. That is important. It's just that if nothing changes underneath it, if the individual things that are generating the sensation haven't been touched, then the sensation will come back because the source is still there, right? The bone is still broken. And you didn't fix the thing. You just manage the feeling that the thing produces, right? You didn't fix the broken bone. You've just been using painkillers to make the pain go away. And I really like to think about this, to throw another metaphor at you, which if you work with me one-on-one, I love my metaphors. But I like to think of it as like, when you have a tangled knot of jewelry and it's just a complete disaster, right? It's like totally matted. You don't even know where one chain ends and another begins. You don't even know how many things are in there. And they're like, oh, there's a ring in there too. Like it's just complete chaos. And the temptation is to just kind of sort of pull at the thing, right? Your initial instinct is like to kind of loosen it kind of generally. You just like pull here and then you might pull there and you might pull there. And it helps a little bit, right? Things do get loosened, but eventually you just give up and throw it away because the only thing that is actually going to work is to find the one individual chain and follow it and work on that specific tangle, getting that specific tangle loose, right? That's the strategy, is you find the end and you kind of like follow it one at a time until the whole thing comes apart, right? That's what anxiety is. It's not one giant knot. It's 100 individual chains that have been living together for so long that they feel like one thing. And if you're trying to untangle the whole pile all at once, you're going to be at it forever. And you're going to feel like you're doing something wrong when it's not working, when actually you're just not zoomed in enough. And this is so important to understand because in my work, I look a lot at the things that make us feel like we're the problem, right? The things that like we blame ourselves for. And if you keep using your regulation tools of like, I'm feeling anxious, I'm going to go for a walk. I'm feeling anxious, I'm going to try to focus on my breathing. If you keep doing those and the anxiety keeps coming back because you're not actually addressing the root, eventually you start blaming yourself, right? You start thinking that maybe you are the problem, right? Maybe I'm just like this. Maybe I'm just a more anxious person. Maybe I'm just predisposed to anxiety more than that person, right? You start blaming yourself. And those are the things that I want to capture for my clients, to be like, no, don't blame yourself. It's not a you problem. It's just that it's all tangled together and you're managing the pain instead of the broken bone. So this concept is just so, so important. And this is really the basis of my work, is helping people untangle the chains, helping people identify each of the individual chains that are making up that anxiety, and then addressing them one at a time. So that way it gets resolved, and then you feel you're just not triggered anymore around that thing, right? So a little bit less anxiety is then generated. And that's kind of the process of my work, is just tackling one chain at a time, and you start feeling relief once that chain is tackled. And then over time you feel like a whole new person because you've tackled so many of those individual chains. But we're never working on just like anxiety in general. We're zooming in and focusing in on what the individual strains of the anxiety are. And so why this matters, which I've already started to kind of chip away at, is that I don't think people are doing this because they're not smart or they're not self-aware at all. Again, it's not a you problem if you haven't understood this. I think it's happening because of how we talk about anxiety culturally. We tend to talk about it as if it is a thing, right? An identity almost, of like, I have anxiety. And that framing, which I understand, I'm not here to shame that, but that framing makes it really easy to start treating it as if it's this like one monolithic experience that either gets better or it doesn't. And that's where people get stuck. Because it's not monolithic. It's a collection. It's the accumulation of individual moments, interactions, relationships, experience that taught your subconscious to be on guard. And each one of those has its own root, its own programming, its own specific activation signature. So, the client that had the ex-wife conversations that were triggering him, those aren't the same thing as the ghosting client, right? And the ghosting isn't the same thing as the moment you got overlooked at work. And the moment you got overlooked at work isn't the same thing as the thing your mom said when you were 9. They all produce anxiety. They don't all come from the same place, and they don't all need the same thing to actually shift. And when you're treating them all as one general mass of my anxiety, you're working at the wrong altitude. You're too far up. You can see that something is tangled, but you can't see the individual chains, and the individual chains are where the work actually lives. So the thing that I want to give you, the actual practical thing, is this. The next time you notice anxiety, instead of asking, why am I anxious, or what is wrong with my nervous system, or why is this happening after all of the work that I've done, try zooming in. Get really, really specific. When did you first notice it this time? What was happening right before you noticed it? Who were you with? What were you thinking about? What was said? What was not said? What did it remind you of, even if you can't fully articulate why? Because the answers to those specific questions give you something to actually work with. They give you a specific moment, a specific activation, a specific thread you can follow back to its root. And it's so much more useful than trying to solve for the sensation in general. This is honestly one of the most important things I do with my clients in sessions. I'm always trying to zoom them in, because the more specific you get, the more precise the work becomes. And the more precise the work is, the more things actually shift. Not temporarily, but like they actually dissolve, they actually shift. So you can do general subconscious work and get general results, or you can zoom in, you can find the individual thing, work on that specific root, and watch the anxiety that was attached to that thing stop activating in the same way. Not because you managed it, but because you changed the source. So this is the difference between regulating your anxiety and reprogramming it, which is kind of a core topic that I talk about, kind of threaded throughout all of my work. They're both important. Regulating your anxiety is important because you want to get your baseline back. You want to, you don't want to be like walking around like in panic mode all of the time, right? You want to bring yourself back to calm. But if you think that that is the solution to the anxiety, well, you're misinformed, and you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, because the anxiety is going to come back, right? You just regulated yourself back to feeling calm. But what caused that anxiety in the first place? That is what you want to get to the bottom of. And that is what's going to stop your anxiety from continuously generating. So just to come back to those two clients for a second, because both of them left those sessions so differently than they came in, not because they fixed everything or because they resolved every piece of their anxiety forever, but because they stopped trying to solve for the whole tangled pile and started looking for just one chain. So that's what we did in the sessions, is we found the one chain that gave them the information, and that information gave them direction, and suddenly they weren't spinning anymore, right? Because we addressed the root of that particular anxiety that they were experiencing. That's what zooming in does. It takes something that feels huge and ambient and impossible to get your hands around, and it gives it shape. And once something has shape, you can work with it. So if you've been feeling like you've been doing the work and the anxiety keeps coming back, I really want you to consider that maybe it's not the same anxiety every time, but you're thinking it is because you're just noticing the sensation of anxiety without actually being the investigator trying to figure out what the anxiety is, what's triggering that specific anxiety, right? Like a lot of my clients, a lot of people that I see and talk to, they feel like they can never escape their anxiety because it's just, again, they're just generalizing it. But usually what's happening is they just have so many individual triggers that are happening that it feels like they can never escape it, but it's really just the culmination of all of those triggers. So maybe for you, it's just different individual things that are producing the same sensation, right? The work isn't just to make the sensation go away. Again, do that to get yourself back to calm. But the work to dissolve it is to find the things underneath one at a time and actually change those things. And that is the difference between managing your anxiety forever and not needing to manage it anymore. And actually, one of the things that I like to think about when we're talking about like these individual threads is I like to think about them as roommates living in your head. And when they're all activated at the same time, all of them with something to say, it feels like absolute chaos in there, right? It will, imagine you have 3 different roommates and everyone's yelling at the same time, right? You'd be like, holy cow, I'm overstimulated. I need to get out of here, right? But when you can sit down each roommate and you can be like, okay, what's your problem? Let's tackle that. And you address that and you give them what they need. And then you go to the second roommate and you're like, okay, what's your problem? What do you need? And you address that. And then you go to the third, right? That's kind of how I see it, because when you can sit down with each one individually and actually figure out what like that specific roommate needs, then that's when things actually start to get quiet. Not because you were like yelling at all of them at the same time. When you can actually sit each one down and address each one, then you're actually making progress and you're moving forward. So if you want to figure out what your anxiety is linked to, where it's actually coming from, what the source is, not in general, but specifically, I do actually have a free quiz for you, and I will link it in the show notes or the description if you're on YouTube, and it will walk you through exactly what source is contributing to your anxiety. It's super fun, and I will see you in next week's episode.